A small-town janitor laughed for inheriting a worthless barn. Never imagined his life was about to change forever. But when a powerful corporation showed up with an offer he couldn't refuse, the entire town would learn the true meaning of underestimating someone. This is a story of hidden fortunes, second chances, and the power of resilience. Before we dive into this incredible journey, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us that life can change in an instant. Stay tuned for more inspiring tales. The last laugh. The bell above Cedar Fork High's cafeteria doors chimed as Ethan Caldwell pushed his mop across the scuffed linoleum floor. The scent of stale pizza and disinfectant hung thick in the air, a smell so familiar it barely registered anymore. Around him, students laughed, their voices bouncing off the cinder block walls, their eyes sliding right past him like he was par furniture. That was fine. Ethan was used to being invisible. At 42, he'd spent nearly half his life in this school, first as a troubled kid scraping by, now as a janitor cleaning up after a new generation of kids who barely noticed him. The work was honest, if unglamorous, and it paid just enough to keep the lights on in his single-wide trailer on the edge of town. But today was different. Today, Ethan wasn't just a guy who mopped up spilled milk. Today, he was the punchline of Cedar Fork's newest joke. "Hey, Caldwell." Coach Dave's booming voice cut through the cafeteria chatter. The football coach leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Heard you finally got your big inheritance. When's the mansion warming party?" A few teachers nearby chuckled into their coffee cups. Ethan tightened his grip on the mop handle, but kept his voice even. "Just an old barn, Coach. Nothing fancy." "Oh, I know," Dave said, grinning. "Drove past it yesterday. Place looks like a strong breeze could finish it off. You gonna fix it up? Turn it into your dream home." More laughter. Ethan forced a smile, the same one he perfected over years of biting his tongue. The barn, if you could even call it that anymore, was the only thing his late uncle, Silas, had left him. A rotting, leaning structure on a patch of land so far out of town most folks forgot existed. To everyone else, it was worthless. A joke. But Silas hadn't been a man who did things without reason. Ethan remembered the last time he'd seen his uncle, years ago, standing in that same barn, his gnarled hands resting on a rusted tractor. "Someday this'll be yours," Silas had said, his voice gravelly. "And when it is, you remember there's more here than meets the eye." At the time, Ethan had nodded, assuming the old man was just being sentimental. Now, he wasn't so sure. After his shift ended, Ethan drove his battered pickup down the dirt road, leading to the property. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the fields, turning the weeds gold. The barn stood at the end of the lane, its weathered with groaning in the wind. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his boots. Dust motes swirled in the shaft of light, cutting through the broken slats. The place was a graveyard of forgotten things, rusted tools, a stack of mildewed feed sacks, an ancient workbench buried under decades of grime. Ethan sighed. Maybe the town was right. Maybe this was just a useless pile of lumber. But then his boot hit something solid. He knelt, brushing away the dirt, and his fingers touched cold metal. A handle. A hatch. His pulse kicked up. The hinges screamed as he yanked it open, revealing a set of narrow stairs descending into darkness. The air that rushed up was damp, smelling of earth and something else. Oil? Ethan pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut to black, illuminating a small underground chamber. And there in the center sat an old leather-bound journal. He opened it, the pages crackling under his fingers. And then he saw it. A single line written in his uncle's shaky hand. "If they find out about the oil, they'll take everything." Ethan's breath caught. The sound of an engine rumbling outside snapped his head up. Tires on gravel. Someone was here. He slammed the journal shut, heart hammering. Who else knew about this place? And what the hell had his uncle gotten him into? Buried secrets. The engine's growl cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Ethan's grip tightened around the journal as he stood frozen in the underground chamber, listening. Heavy footsteps crunched across the gravel outside, slow and deliberate. Too heavy to be an animal. His first instinct was to bolt, slam the hatch shut, and pretend he'd never been here. But something held him in place. The journal. The words oil, and they'll take everything pulse in his mind like a warning. Whoever was outside, they weren't here by accident. Ethan switched off his phone's flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness. His breath came fast and shallow as he crept toward the stairs, ears straining. A car door creaked open. Then another. At least 2 people. Think, Ethan. Think. The hatch led right into the center of the barn. If they came inside, they'd see it immediately. He needed another way out. His fingers brushed the damp earthen wall beside the stairs, searching blindly until he found a gap, a narrow crawl space, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. His uncle must have dug it as an escape route. Gritting his teeth, Ethan shoved the journal into the waistband of his jeans and dropped to his hands and knees. The tunnel smelled of wet soil and rusted metal, the air thick and stale. He crawled forward, the jagged edges of rocks biting into his palms. Above him, the barn's floorboards groaned under the weight of footsteps. "Place is a dump," a man's voice muttered. "You sure this is it?" "Survey says it's the right coordinates." A second voice replied, deeper, rougher. "Check for any signs of disturbance." Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He pushed himself deeper into the tunnel, his shoulders scraping against the packed earth. A spiderweb clung to his face, and he fought the urge to gag as the sticky threads caught in his mouth. The tunnel curved sharply, then angled upward. His fingers hit wooden planks. Another hatch, this one hidden beneath a tangle of weeds outside the barn. He pressed his shoulder against it, pushing slowly to avoid noise. Fresh air rushed in as the hatch lifted just enough for him to see. 2 men stood near a black SUV, their backs turned. Both wore dark jackets with logos stitched on the sleeves. A jagged mountain peak with the letters BR beneath it. Blackridge. The name sent a jolt through him. He'd seen it before, on construction signs outside town, on the news when they bought up farmland in the next county. A corporate giant with deep pockets and a reputation for getting what it wanted. And now they were here, on his land. Ethan held his breath as one of the men turned, scanning the field. For a heart-stopping second, the man's gaze swept right over the hatch. Then he shook his head. "Nothing. Let's check the maps again." The men climbed back into the SUV. The engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as they pulled away. Ethan didn't move until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then he shoved the hatch open and rolled onto the grass, gasping. The evening sky stretched above him, streaked with orange and purple. He sat up, pulling the journal from his waistband. The leather was warm from his body heat, the pages brittle. Flipping it open, he skimmed the entries with shaking hands. Most were mundane, notes on crop rotations, repairs to the barn, the price of feed. But then, near the middle, the entries changed. June 12, 1987. Found something today. Dug a new well near the south fence. Hit a black sludge that stank like hell. Thought it was just runoff. But then I remembered Old Man Harlow's stories about how this land used to bubble up with oil back in the 1920s before the big companies drained it dry. Took a sample to a geologist friend in Lincoln. He wouldn't say much, just told me to keep quiet. Said if this got out, it'd be a bloodbath for landowners. Ethan's throat went dry. He turned the page. July 3rd, 1987. Men in suits showed up today. Offered to buy the land for triple its value. Wouldn't say why. Told them no. They didn't like that. One of them left a card, Blackridge Resources. Said they'd be back. I'm hiding the reports. If something happens to me, this land goes to Ethan. He'll know what to do. A cold knot formed in Ethan's stomach. His uncle had known. Known the land was valuable. Known someone would come for it. And now, 30 years later, they had. Ethan snapped the journal shut and stood, his legs unsteady. The barn loomed behind him, its broken silhouette stark against the twilight. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to get them. The offer. The neon sign of Maggie's Diner buzzed faintly in the humid Nebraska night, casting a flickering glow over the cracked parking lot. Ethan sat in his truck, engine off, staring at the journal on the passenger seat. His hands still smelled of damp earth and rust. He shouldn't be here. Going home. wherever that was now, his trailer or the rotting barn, felt like walking into a trap. Those men had been inside the barn. They knew, and if they'd come once, they'd come again. But there was one person in Cedar Fork who might understand what was happening. The diner's bell jingled as Ethan pushed inside. The air was thick with the scent of frying bacon and stale coffee. A few truckers hunched over the counter, nursing midnight coffees, while a couple of deputies from the sheriff's office lingered in the booth, their uniforms rumpled from a long shift. And in the far corner, scribbling in a notebook with a half-eaten slice of pie in front of her, sat Leah Carter, Cedar Fork's only investigative reporter. Ethan hesitated. Leah was sharp, too sharp. Her articles had exposed corruption in the county commissioner's office last year, and she'd nearly gotten fired for pushing too hard on a story about Blackridge's land grabs up north. If anyone would believe him, it was her. But once he told her, there was no taking it back. He slid into the booth across from her. Leah didn't look up. If you're selling something, I'm broke. If you're preaching, I'm an atheist. I need your help, Ethan said, voice low. That got her attention. Her pen stilled. Dark brown eyes flicked up, studying him with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Ethan Caldwell. She tilted her head. You're the guy who inherited Silas's barn. Yeah. He glanced around, then pulled the journal from his jacket and slid it across the table. And I think it's why Blackridge Resources just sent men to search my property tonight. Leah's fingers hovered over the journal, like it might burn her. Then, slowly, she flipped it open. Ethan watched her face as she read. The slight twitch of her brow at the first mention of oil. The way her lips pressed into a thin line at the entry about the men in suits. When she reached the final page, he'll know what to do. She exhaled sharply and shut the book. You realize what this means, right? She whispered. It means my uncle found oil. It means you're sitting on a fortune, Leah corrected. And Blackridge doesn't like loose ends. Before Ethan could respond, the diner's door opened again. A gust of wind carried in the scent of expensive perfume. A woman strode inside, tall mid-40s with a steel-gray bob and a tailored black pantsuit that screamed money. She scanned the room like she owned it. Then her gaze landed on Ethan. Mr. Caldwell, she said, smiling. What a coincidence. Leah's foot nudged Ethan's under the table, a silent warning. The woman didn't wait for an invitation. She slid into the booth beside Ethan, her manicured fingers lacing together on the table. Victoria Klein. I'm with Blackridge Energy. Ethan's stomach dropped. You were at my barn. Victoria's smile didn't waver. Our survey team was in the area. Routine checks. She tilted her head. Though I admit, I'm surprised to find you here. Most men would be celebrating after inheriting land with potential. Leah's eyes narrowed. What kind of potential? Victoria ignored her, keeping her focus on Ethan. We'd like to make you an offer, Mr. Caldwell. A generous one. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a check, sliding across the table with 2 fingers. The number made Ethan's vision blur. $125 million. That's a starting point, Victoria said smoothly. We can negotiate. The diner's noises faded. The clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, even Leah's sharp inhale beside him. All Ethan could hear was the pounding of his own heart. That kind of money could change everything. Pay off debts. Buy a real house. Hell, he could leave Cedar Fork forever. But then he remembered his uncle's warning. They'll take everything. And the way those men had prowled through his barn like they already owned it. Ethan pushed the check back. I'll think about it. Victoria's smile turned icy. Of course. She stood, straightening her blazer. But don't think too long, Mr. Caldwell. Opportunities like this, they disappear. With that, she walked out, the diner's door swinging shut behind her. Silence hung over the booth. Leah was the first to speak. You're not seriously considering that, are you? Ethan stared at the check, still lying on the table. I don't know. Ethan. Leah leaned forward, her voice urgent. That offer? It's not a gift. It's a threat. They don't pay that kind of money unless they're planning to take way more. Outside, headlights flared as Victoria's town car pulled away. Ethan exhaled. Then what the hell do I do? Leah's grin was razor sharp. You fight back. The devil in the details. Rain pattered against the diner's windows as Ethan stared at the check, the numbers seeming to pulse under the fluorescent lights. $125 million. Enough to erase every bad decision, every unpaid bill, every sleepless night wondering if he'd ever be more than the guy who cleaned up other people's messes. Leah snatched the check before he could touch it again. Don't even think about folding, she muttered, tucking it into her notebook. That woman didn't come here to negotiate. She came to intimidate. Ethan rubbed his temples. Then why offer money at all? If Blackridge wanted to scare me off, they could have just sent more guys with crowbars. Because they're smart. Leah pulled out her phone, tapping rapidly. Violence leaves evidence. Paper trails? Those can disappear. She turned the screen toward him. An article from 6 months ago. Blackridge Resources. Eminent domain battles in rural Nebraska. The photo showed a farmer, face weathered and furious, standing in front of a bulldozer. Carl Jepson, Leah said, owned 200 acres outside Grand Island. Blackridge wanted it for a pipeline. When he refused, suddenly the county declared his land critical infrastructure. They took for pennies. Ethan's stomach twisted. They can do that with the right lawyers and politicians in their pocket? Absolutely. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. But your uncle knew that, which is why he hid everything. A crash of thunder rattled the windows. The deputies at the counter glanced over, then went back to their coffees. Ethan lowered his voice. So what do we do? Leah's eyes gleamed. First, we verify. If there's really oil under your land, we need proof that's yours, not something Blackridge can twist in court. She tapped the journal. Your uncle mentioned a geologist in Lincoln. We find him. The drive to Lincoln took 2 hours, the storm turning the highway into a river of reflected brake lights. Leah's beat-up Honda smelled like old fast food and ambition, her fingers drumming the wheel to some angry punk rock album Ethan didn't recognize. You ever been to Lincoln? She asked over the music. Not since high school. Ethan watched the rain smear the passing fields into green blurs. You really think this geologist will talk? Depends. Leah smirked. How persuasive are you? The University of Nebraska Geology Department was a brutalist concrete block, its halls echoing with the squeak of sneakers and the hum of late-night lab equipment. Leah flashed a press badge at the drowsy grad student manning the front desk. We're here for Dr. Robert Hayes. Urgent alumni matter. The grad student blinked. Hayes retired like 15 years ago. We know, Leah said smoothly, but he left something important for Silas Caldwell's family. It'll just take a minute. Ethan stiffened. How the hell did she? The student shrugged and scribbled an address on a sticky note. He's at Sunny Acres. Good luck. Guy's kind of crusty. Sunny Acres Retirement Village smelled like antiseptic and overcooked peas. Hayes' room was at the end of a too-bright hallway, the door slightly ajar. Leah knocked. Dr. Hayes? We're friends of Silas Caldwell. A wheezing laugh came from inside. Silas doesn't have friends. He has enemies and people he hasn't pissed off yet. The man in the wheelchair was a skeleton in a flannel shirt. His white beard yellowed at the edges like old newspaper. But his eyes, sharp and dark, locked onto Ethan instantly. You're the nephew? Ethan nodded. You knew my uncle. Knew him? Hell, I owed him. Hayes rolled closer. That barn of yours. He made me swear never to file the reports. Said if the wrong people found out what was under it. He trailed off, glancing at Leah. Who's this? The right people, Ethan said. Hayes studied them both, then sighed, reaching under his blanket. He pulled out a faded manila envelope. Silas gave me this the night before he died. Said if you ever came asking, it was yours. Ethan opened it. The first page was a lab report, stamped confidential. The second was a map of Cedar Fork, with a red circle around his uncle's land. And the third, holy shit, Leah breathed, a seismic survey. And right beneath the barn, a deep, jagged spike labeled EST, 12 million barrels. Hayes smirked. Congratulations, kid. You're sitting on the biggest untapped reserve in Nebraska. He leaned in. Now, you're going to let those corporate vampires take it? Outside, lightning split the sky. Ethan's hands didn't shake this time. No, he said. I'm going to bury them with it. The gathering storm. The pre-dawn air hung thick with the scent of wet earth as Ethan and Leah sped back toward Cedar Fork. The seismic survey spread across the dashboard. The numbers glared up at Ethan. 12 million barrels. Enough to make him richer than anyone in the county. Enough to paint a target on his back. Leah broke the silence first. We need to move fast. If Blackridge had people watching your barn, they'll have people watching Hayes too. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. What's our play? First, we secure the evidence. Leah pulled out her phone, snapping photos of each document. Copies to my editor, my cloud, and a USB buried in my mom's freezer. Ethan shot her a look. What? I grew up with paranoid preppers. She grinned, but it faded fast. Second, we get you a lawyer. A bulldog who's fought Blackridge before. With what money? Leah tapped the seismic survey. With this, any oil and gas attorney will take your case on contingency once they see these numbers. A flicker of movement in the rearview mirror caught Ethan's eye. Headlights, far back but gaining. His stomach dropped. Leah, we're being followed. The black SUV matched the one from the barn. Leah didn't turn around. Take the next left. That's a dirt road to... Exactly. Ethan wrenched the wheel. The Honda skidded onto the unpaved track, tires kicking up gravel. The SUV followed, its high beams flooding their cabin with blinding light. Leah pulled a handheld radio from her bag. Sheriff's Department scanner. Stole it from the diner. She tuned it to static. Then a dispatcher's voice crackled through. 10 to 80 in progress. County Road 17. Perfect. Leah grabbed Ethan's arm. When I say so, brake hard. The SUV loomed closer. Now! Ethan slammed the brakes. The Honda fishtailed, kicking up a dust cloud. The SUV swerved to avoid them, straight into the path of an oncoming sheriff's cruiser, lights flashing. That's for Carl Jepson, Leah muttered as the cruiser skidded to a halt behind the SUV. Ethan didn't wait to see the fallout. He punched the gas. By noon, they'd holed up in the one place no one would look, the back booth of the Cedar Fork Public Library. The ancient librarian, Mrs. Peabody, had glared at them over her cat-eye glasses, but said nothing as Leah spread documents across the table. Got a name, she whispered, sliding a newspaper clipping toward Ethan. Miranda Shaw, environmental lawyer. Took Blackridge to court 3 times. Won twice. The photo showed a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked braids and a stare that could cut glass. Ethan frowned. An environmentalist? Wouldn't she want the oil to stay in the ground? She hates corporate bullies more. Leah dialed a number, putting the phone on speaker. 2 rings, then a voice like gravel and honey. Shaw Law. Miranda? Leah Carter. Cedar Fork Gazette. I've got a landowner here with proof Blackridge is trying to steal his mineral rights. A pause. How much proof? Leah held the seismic survey up to the phone's camera. The line went silent for 3 heartbeats. Then, address, now. Miranda Shaw arrived in a rust-pocked Subaru, her boots caked with mud from what she called a little pipeline protest detour. Within an hour, she'd turned the library table into a war room. Laptop open, printer humming, a stack of cease and desist letters already drafted. First move, she said, stabbing a finger at the survey. We file this with the county recorder before Blackridge can slap a lien on your land. Ethan blinked. They can do that? Honey, they'll try everything. Miranda tossed him a business card. My geologist. Get you an independent reserve valuation by tomorrow. Leah's phone buzzed. She paled. Hayes is dead. Ethan's blood turned to ice. What? Just hit the scanner. Natural causes at Sunny Acres. Leah's jaw tightened. An hour after we left. Miranda didn't look surprised. Blackridge plays dirty. But now... She tapped the freshly filed documents. Now they have to play by our rules. The library's front door creaked open. All three turned. Victoria Klein stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in suits. Her smile was poison wrapped in silk. "Mr. Caldwell, how lovely to see you again." Ethan stood slowly, the seismic survey crumpling in his fist. The storm had arrived. Lines in the sand. The library's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets as Victoria Klein stepped further inside, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum. The two suits behind her didn't move, their arms crossed, their eyes scanning the room like they were already calculating how much force it would take to clear it. Ethan felt Leah tense beside him, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. Miranda Shaw, however, didn't even look up from her laptop. "Miss Klein," Miranda said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "I'd say it's a pleasure, but we both know I'd be lying." Victoria's smile didn't falter. "Miranda Shaw, I should have known you'd slither into this." She turned her gaze to Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell, I'd hope we could handle this like adults, but since you've involved outside parties..." "You mean the lawyer you can't intimidate?" Leah cut in. One of the suits shifted, but Victoria held up a hand. "Let's not be dramatic. I'm here to make one final offer." She pulled an envelope from her blazer and slid it across the table. $150 million. Signed today, and the money clears by morning. Ethan didn't touch it. Miranda finally looked up, her eyes sharp. "Funny, that's exactly the number our geologist estimated the mineral rights are worth." She leaned back in her chair, almost like you've been eavesdropping. Victoria's mask slipped for half a second, just long enough for Ethan to see the frustration beneath. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy. The state's already reviewing eminent domain filings for pipeline expansion. If you force us to go that route..." "You what?" Ethan stood, his chair scraping loudly. Mrs. Peabody shot him a glare from the front desk, but he didn't care. "Steal it like you did from Carl Jepsen? Like you tried with my uncle?" Victoria's lips thinned. "Your uncle was a stubborn old man who died waiting for a payday that was never coming." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Leah was on her feet before he could react. "Get out." "Or what?" Victoria arched a brow. "You'll write a scathing editorial?" Miranda stood slowly, her voice low but razor-edged. "Or I filed a racketeering suit sitting in my drafts." How many eminent domain emergencies can Blackridge claim before the feds start asking questions? Silence. Victoria's smile vanished. She looked at Ethan, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "You're making a mistake. Money's the only thing keeping you safe right now." Then she turned and walked out, the suits following like shadows. The door hadn't even fully closed before Miranda was on her phone. "Change of plans. We need to move now." 2 hours later, Ethan stood in the Cedar Fork courthouse, his hand hovering over the freshly printed deed. The clerk, a bored-looking woman with chipped nail polish, sighed. "Just sign where it's highlighted, Mr. Caldwell." Miranda had explained it twice. By transferring partial ownership to a newly created LLC, they'd make it harder for Blackridge to seize the land outright. But it still felt like gambling with his uncle's legacy. "Do it," Leah urged, "before they freeze your assets." Ethan signed. The clerk stamped the paperwork with a loud thunk. "Congratulations. You're now co-owner Caldwell Minerals, LLC. Miranda snatched the documents before the ink could dry. Next stop, the press. The Cedar Fork Gazette's office was little more than a converted storefront, its windows plastered with yellowed award certificates and protest flyers. The editor, a grizzled man named Hank with a permanent coffee stain on his shirt, didn't look up from his computer as they entered. "Leah, you're fired." "I'm a freelancer," she shot back. "You can't fire me." "Then I'm not paying you for whatever mess you're dragging in here." Leah dropped the seismic survey on his keyboard. 12 million barrels. And Blackridge just threatened Ethan to keep it quiet. Hank's fingers stilled. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. Then he let out a low whistle. "Well, shit." Miranda crossed her arms. "We go public. Full spread. Names, numbers, and Hayes' natural causes death." "They'll sue us into oblivion," Hank muttered. "Only if they can prove it's false." Leah grinned. "Good thing we got receipts." Hank rubbed his temples. Fine, but we run it tomorrow before Blackridge can get an injunction. He pointed at Ethan. And you give me an exclusive interview. Right now. Ethan swallowed hard. This was it. No turning back. Where do I start? The breaking point. The Cedar Fork Gazette hit the stands at dawn. Ethan watched from his truck as the newspaper boy tossed bundles onto porches and into rusted metal racks outside the diner. The front page screamed in bold black letters. Blackridge's dirty secret. How a small-town janitor uncovered a $500 million oil scandal. Beneath it was a photo of the seismic survey and a grainy shot of Victoria Klein, leaving the library. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. There was no going back now. Leah had insisted he stay off his property last night. They'll come for you first if they're desperate. So he'd slept in his truck behind the high school, jumping at every shadow. Now, as the town stirred to life, he could already feel the shift. The diner's regulars clustered around copies of the paper, their murmurs carrying through the glass. A deputy slowed his cruiser to grab a copy, his expression unreadable. And across the street, the Blackridge field office, a small, unassuming storefront with tinted windows, had its blinds drawn tight. Ethan's phone buzzed. Leah, turn on KBFR 98.3. Now! He fumbled with the radio. A crisp female voice filled the cab. Breaking news out of Lincoln. State Senator Maureen Voss has just announced an emergency hearing into Blackridge Resources' alleged use of eminent domain for private gain. This comes hours after the Cedar Fork Gazette published explosive documents suggesting. The radio cut to static. Then a new voice, male and urgent. All units, respond 3402, County Road 17. Structure fire. Repeat, structure fire. Ethan's blood turned to ice. 3402, County Road 17. His barn. Thick black smoke coiled into the sky long before Ethan reached the property. He fishtailed onto the dirt road, his heart hammering against his ribs. The barn was gone. Not burning, gone. Reduced to a skeleton of charred beams and glowing embers. Firefighters sprayed useless arcs of water over the wreckage, their faces grim. Ethan stumbled out of the truck, the heat blistering his skin even from 20 feet away. Sir, stay back. A firefighter blocked his path. What happened? Ethan's voice cracked. Gas line rupture, maybe. The man wiped soot from his brow. Lucky no one was inside. Lucky. The word tasted like ash. A hand gripped Ethan's arm. Leah, her face pale under a hastily tied-back mess of curls. They knew, she whispered. They knew we filed the LLC, knew the story was going public. Where's Miranda? Lincoln, prepping the injunction. Leah's grip tightened. Ethan, the hatch. He didn't let her finish. Shoving past a firefighter, he sprinted toward the ruins. The heat seared his lungs, the embers burning through his boots, but he didn't stop until he reached the epicenter, where the hatch had been. Now it was a molten crater. They torched the evidence, Leah said behind him. Ethan crouched, his fingers digging into the scorched earth. Then he froze. Something glinted in the debris. A twisted piece of metal. No, a lockbox, warped but intact. His uncle's initials, SC, still visible on the side. The firefighter's shouts faded as Ethan pried it open. Inside, wrapped in heat-blistered plastic, was a single sheet of paper. A deed, but not for the barn. For a second property, signed over to Ethan in shaky handwriting the day before Silas died. Coordinates led to a parcel deep in the Nebraska sandhills. And scrawled at the bottom, when they come to the barn, they'll miss the real treasure. Leah's breath hitched. Your uncle knew they'd do this. Ethan stared at the coordinates, his pulse roaring. Blackridge had just made their biggest mistake. They'd left him with nothing to lose. The hidden truth. The sandhills stretched before him like an endless ocean of grass and dunes, the wind whispering secrets through the tall blades. Ethan gripped the steering wheel as the truck bounced along the dirt track, the coordinates from his uncle's deed burning a hole in his pocket. Leah squinted at the GPS on her phone. It should be just past that ridge. Ethan didn't answer. His mind was still back at the smoldering remains of the barn, the way the fire had devoured everything, except the one thing his uncle had made sure would survive, When they come for the barn, they'll miss the real treasure. What the hell had Silas been hiding out here? The truck crested the hill, and there was a weathered cabin, half buried in the side of a dune like it had grown there. No road led to it. No signs marked its existence. Just a lone structure in the middle of nowhere, its windows dark, its porch sagging under decades of neglect. Ethan killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Leah let out a low whistle. "Your uncle had a bunker?" "Not a bunker," Ethan said, stepping out. "A vault." The front door was locked, but the wood around the handle was brittle with age. One solid kick, and it splintered inward with a groan. Dust swirled in the shafts of light, cutting through the cracks in the walls. The air smelled of old leather and something sharper. Chemicals, maybe. Then Ethan saw it. Against the far wall stood a steel safe, the kind banks used in the 1920s, its surface pitted with rust but still solid. And above it, nailed to the wall, was a map of Nebraska with red line spiderwebbing across it, pipelines, oil fields, and parcels of land marked with Blackridge's logo. Leah sucked in a breath. He was tracking them. Ethan stepped closer. Taped to the safe was a yellowed envelope with his name on it. Inside, a single key. His hands shook as he fitted it into the safe's lock. The mechanism groaned in protest, then gave way with a heavy clunk. The door swung open. Inside wasn't money. It was proof. Stacked floor to ceiling were files, land deeds, contracts, geological surveys, all tied to Blackridge. And at the center, a leather-bound ledger with names, dates, and amounts. Leah pulled it out, flipping to the pages. "Payoffs," she whispered. "Judges, county commissioners, even a state senator." She looked up, her eyes wide. "Ethan, this isn't just about oil. This is how they've been stealing land for decades." Ethan picked up a faded photograph tucked into the ledger. It showed a younger Silas, standing with a group of men in front of a drilling rig. One face stood out, a man with sharp features and a familiar smirk. "That's Victoria Klein's father," Leah said. "Blackridge's founder." Ethan's throat tightened. "My uncle worked for them." And then he turned on them. Leah corrected. She held up a final document, a lawsuit never filed, accusing Blackridge of fraud, environmental violations, and worse. Silas had signed it, dated the week he died. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Ethan closed the safe. "We need Miranda." Leah was already dialing. "She's not going to believe this." Ethan stared at the map, the red lines like veins across the state. Blackridge had tried to erase Silas. Now, it was his turn to expose them. The trap. The safe's contents were spread across Miranda Shaw's dining table. Files, photographs, and a damning ledger that tied Blackridge to decades of corruption. Miranda paced behind the table, her silver braids swaying as she muttered to herself, pausing only to sip from a chipped mug of black coffee. "This is bigger than I thought," she finally said, setting the mug down with a sharp clink. "We're not just dealing with corporate greed. We're dealing with a machine built to crush people like you." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his fingers catching on tangles of sweat and dust. "So what do we do with it?" Miranda's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "We bait them." Leah leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "You want to lure Blackridge?" "Not just lure them. Record them admitting everything." Miranda pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "I have a friend at the FBI's white-collar crimes division. He's been waiting for something like this." Ethan's stomach twisted. "You want to set up a sting?" "I want to end this." Miranda's voice was steel. "But to do that, we need Victoria Klein to walk into a trap of her own making." 3 hours later, Ethan sat alone in a Lincoln coffee shop, his leg bouncing under the table. The briefcase Miranda had given him rested against his chair, empty except for a single folder containing copies of the most damning documents. The originals were locked in a safe deposit box, with instructions to release them if anything happened to any of them. The bell above the door chimed. Victoria Klein walked in, her sharp eyes scanning the room before landing on Ethan. She wore a tailored navy pantsuit today, her hair pulled back in a flawless chignon. The only sign of stress was a slight tension in her jaw as she slid into the seat across from him. "You look like hell, Mr. Caldwell." "Long night." Ethan said, pushing the briefcase toward her with his foot. I think you'll find what you're looking for in there. Victoria didn't touch it. Why the sudden change of heart? Because I'm not my uncle. Ethan met her gaze, forcing his voice to stay steady. I don't want a war. I want out. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then reached down and flipped the briefcase open. Her fingers paused over the folder, her polished nails tapping once before she pulled it out. You kept copies, she observed. Insurance. She flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. Then she stopped at the last page, a photograph of her father standing beside Silas Caldwell in front of a drilling rig. Her breath hitched, just barely. Where did you get this? Does it matter? Ethan leaned forward. I'll give you the originals. All of them. In exchange for one thing. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What? Admit it. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Admit what your company did to my uncle. For a heartbeat, Victoria said nothing. Then she smiled, a cold, calculated thing. Your uncle was a fool. He thought he could expose us, but all he did was get himself killed. She tilted her head. A gas leak in his home. Very tragic. Ethan's blood ran cold. Victoria closed the folder. The originals. Buy tonight, or the next accident won't be a barn. She stood, smoothing her jacket, and walked out without looking back. Ethan exhaled shakily, then reached into his pocket and turned off the tiny recorder Miranda had given him. Got her. The Reckoning. The recording of Victoria Klein's confession played to the speakers of the FBI field office, her cold voice echoing off the sterile walls. Your uncle was a fool. He thought he could expose us, but all he did was get himself killed. Special Agent Ruiz, a wiry man with salt and pepper stubble, paused the playback and leaned back in his chair. This is enough to open a federal investigation, but it's not enough to guarantee convictions. Miranda Shaw across her arms. It's enough for a warrant. And once you dig, you'll find everything else we gave you, the ledger, the payoffs, the falsified environmental reports. Leah, perched on the edge of a filing cabinet, shot Ethan a look. What about witness protection? They threatened his life on tape. Ruiz sighed. We can offer temporary protection. But if you really want to bury Blackridge, we need you to testify, Caldwell, in open court. Ethan hadn't spoken since they entered the office. His hand still trembled from the coffee shop meeting, the way Victoria had so casually admitted to murder. I'll testify, he said quietly. The news broke at noon the next day. Blackridge executive arrested in $500 million fraud scheme. Federal agents raid corporate offices. State Senator Voss implicated in bribery scandal. Ethan watched it all unfold from the safe house window, a cheap motel on the outskirts of Omaha. Leah had insisted on staying with him, her laptop open as she live-tweeted every development. Miranda was already prepping the civil suit, one that would reclaim stolen land for dozens of families. Not just his. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. You think this is over? The message was followed by a photo, a grainy surveillance shot of him, and Leah entering the FBI office. Ethan deleted it. It didn't matter. Blackridge was crumbling. The stock had plummeted. Whistleblowers were coming forward by the dozen, and Silas Caldwell's name was finally being cleared. 1 month later, Ethan stood on the steps of the Cedar Fork courthouse, squinting against the flash of cameras. The settlement had just been finalized, $87 million for his mineral rights, plus reparations for the families Blackridge had cheated. Leah nudged him. Say something profound. Ethan looked out at the crowd. Reporters, neighbors, even a few of the kids from the high school who used to ignore him. My uncle once told me, there's more to life than meets the eye, he said. Turns out he was right. The crowd laughed, but Ethan wasn't smiling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, the one to the Sandhills cabin. This isn't just about money. It's about making sure no one else gets robbed like we did. So I'm donating half to start a legal fund for landowners fighting corporate greed. The applause was deafening. As Ethan stepped away from the microphones, Leah grabbed his arm. You do realize you just became a folk hero, right? Nah, Ethan said, glancing at the horizon where the sun dipped low over the prairie. I'm just a janitor who got lucky. but for the first time in his life, he knew that wasn't true. What would you do if you uncovered a secret worth millions? Let us know in the comments. And if this story inspired you, hit like, share, and subscribe for more real-life underdog tales. Because sometimes the quietest people change the world.